Public education in Zimbabwe was made free in 1980 and inequities from the existing colonial system lessened. Education was declared a basic human right by Robert Mugabe's incoming government and racial integration pursued. However, since 1988, the government has steadily increased the charges attached to school enrollment until they now greatly exceed the real value of fees in 1980. In principle, all children in Zimbabwe have the right to education. However, both development levies and tuition fees must be paid. Tuition fees have historically been very low, though development levies have been impediments. The majority of the wealthier portion of the population send their children to independent schools, while the government-run schools are attended by the poorer members of the black population. The Ministry of Education, Sports and Culture manages primary and secondary education, while the Higher and Tertiary Education, Science and Technology Development of Zimbabwe maintains and operates higher and tertiary education. Both are regulated by the Cabinet of Zimbabwe. The education system in Zimbabwe encompasses 13 years of primary and secondary school running from January to December. The school year is a total of 40 weeks with 3 terms and a month break in between each term. The country's education system was once the most developed on the continent, although it continues to suffer from a contemporary decline in public funding linked to hyperinflation and economic mismanagement. The country is currently working towards the Sustainable Development Goal of providing universal and free education to all students. Economic downturn has caused numerous vulnerable schoolchildren to drop out over the years, though new programs aim to rectify the situation. Recently, large investments in education have been provided by UNICEF, the international donor community, and the government of Zimbabwe, through the Educational Transition Fund and the Basic Education Assistance Module. BEAM aims to offset costs for orphans and vulnerable children. These funds together help combat problems associated with deteriorating buildings, lack of supplies and shortage of resources in general. UNICEF aims to supply each schoolchild with textbooks through BEAM, and in 2011, for the first time in decades, around 13 million textbooks will be delivered to Zimbabwe, a unregistered trademark as primary schools made possible by donations from Scandinavian countries and Germany. Other challenges face the education sector in Zimbabwe, including having a lower proportion of female students, though the Education Act provides for equal access. History Colonial government to 1980 British settlers arrived in the 1890s to southern Rhodesia, the area now known as Zimbabwe, and created Christian missionary schools to serve local communities. The colonial government provided an education for the indigenous population that was focused on agricultural production and industrial development, including carpentry, building and agriculture. Researchers claim that in order to control the locals, the colonial government limited education and censored knowledge in schools. Limits in access to education kept Africans in positions of labor and subordinate to white colonists in order to advance European political and economic gains. Missionary schools perpetuated social and economic repression of the indigenous population by reducing their chances of earning well-paying jobs or positions of power through offering limited education and foundational skills for labor exploitation and external servitude. Segregation of funding and quality of education were most extreme in the 1970s because during that decade Europeans represented 1% of Zimbabwe's population, but were allocated 99% of government spending on education. The Education Act of 1979 regulated access to each type of school through a zoning system based on residence. Before the Act, Zimbabwe's education system was divided between African and European schools. After the shift in policy, the education system split into government schools, community schools and private schools, and split government schools into Group A, B and C. White students historically attended Group A schools that offered highly trained teachers and resources. These schools were located in white suburbs that denied housing opportunities for blacks, a contribution factor in education disadvantages in segregated schools. Group B, requiring a low fee payment in suburban areas, and C schools, which do not require a fee beyond educational materials, were only available for African students. These schools had less resources, funding and qualified faculty compared to Group A schools. Europeans were disproportionately offered more educational resources than the majority black population because the colonial government controlled access to quality schools based on race and socio-economic status. National education reform in the 1980s. In 1980, ZANU Party, Zimbabwe African National Union took power over the white, colonial government through the national election. ZANU democratized education by promising free and compulsory primary and secondary education to all children in Zimbabwe. All primary school tuition fees were abolished after independence. Dr. Dzingai Mutambuka was elected the Minister of Education to support Zimbabwe through education reform and keep students in school. The government allocated 17.3% of the total national budget towards education, which was considered an education miracle. The climate of the education system changed by focusing on fostering self-sufficient students that are productive, motivated and dedicated citizens. Zimbabwe's education system reformed to no longer disadvantage blacks by providing education to all children. Within 1 year, the education system nearly doubled the number of students it served from 885,801 students to 1,310,315 students in primary and secondary education. Thousands of refugee children from Mozambique migrated to Zimbabwe, causing an increase in the number of children attending public schools and need for teachers. The Minister of Education brought in teachers from Australia, Britain and Canada for a short period of time to fill the teaching gaps. Schools expanding their human resources to serve as many children as possible with limited infrastructure by practicing hot seating, which means the school offers class in the morning to half of the school and in the afternoon to the other half, also known as double session schooling. Hot seating was still not enough to meet the demands of the school system. Therefore, the Ministry of Education expanded teacher education colleges rapidly by providing on-the-spot teacher training. In 1986, 8,000 additional teachers were trained to meet the demands of the school system. Communities also built more infrastructure for education. For example, from 1979 to 1984, the number of primary schools in operation increased by 73.3% and the number of secondary schools increased by 537.8%. Following independence, the practice of hot seating exponentially increases the number of students attending school and the need for more infrastructure and teachers, alarming the government of Zimbabwe because of the overwhelming educational demands. Despite the challenges following the magnitude of students to educate, Zimbabwe claimed to achieve universal primary education by the end of the 1980s. By the 1990s, primary schooling was nearly universal and over half the population had completed a secondary education. 2000 to 2009 The country's education system was once the most developed on the continent, although it continues to suffer from a contemporary decline in public funding linked to hyperinflation and economic mismanagement. Economic downturn in the first decade of the 21st century was marked by a period of hyperinflation. By the end of 2008, most schools and hospitals were shut down due to thousands of teachers leaving the profession, the national government cutting health and education's budgets in half and an outbreak of cholera in 2008 leading to a national epidemic. UNICEF asserts that 94% of rural schools, serving the majority of the population, were closed in 2009 and 66 of 70 schools abandoned. During this period of time, the attendance rates plummeted from over 80% to 20%. The economy regained momentum after 2009 once an inclusionary government was formed called the Government of National Unity to resolve national challenges. Statistics: Zimbabwe's focus on expanding education opportunities for the past 25 years has led to national accomplishments including having the highest literacy rate in Africa at 91% among people from 15 to 24. As of 2014, 3,120,000 pupils were enrolled in primary and secondary education. 76% of these students were enrolled in primary education. 10% of pupils ages 15 to 24 have not completed primary education as of 2014. A list of early, primary, Secondary and tertiary schools and providers can be found at Zimbabwe's online school directory. 1. Education stages. Early education preschools are directed by the Early Childhood Education and Care Program and offered for children from 3 to 5. Early education is found in rural and urban areas and can be owned by the government, organizations or individuals. Primary education Zimbabwe's education system mandates 7 years of primary school, encompassing grades 1 to 7. Urban primary schools teach in English, while in rural primary schools students learn in the native language, typically in Shona and Bell, then transition to English by grade 3. Student-to-teacher ratios are typically from 30 to 40 students per teacher and as of 2012 was 36 students per teacher. The curriculum in primary schools encompasses Shona, English, and Bell, art, content and maths. At the end of grade 7, students take a national examination in mathematics, English, Shona and Bell and a general paper covering social sciences, environmental science and religious education. Zimbabwe's government system requires education for all, but this examination can determine the type of secondary education students can attend based on the school's criteria. Private or missionary schools typically have performance requirements, but many rural public schools allow mass admission regardless of performance on the examination. Secondary education Secondary education is not funded by the government and students can attend private boarding school, government boarding school or day school or with an enrollment fee. Secondary education is made up of 2 cycles, O-level, ordinary level, for 4 years and A-level, advanced level, for 2 years. Students take classes in mathematics, English, science, Shona and Bell, geography, and history. The ordinary level certificate examination is taken after 4 years in grade 11 and expects students to pass a minimum of 5 subjects including science, English, mathematics, history and a practical subject like woodwork or agriculture. This examination is ranked on a letter scale and can determine student achievement, selection for A-level schools and employment. Students have the option to enroll in A-level secondary education or can attend Tiachera Euro unregistered trademark S training, technical, agricultural, polytechnic, and nursing training colleges. If a student chooses to enroll in A-level education, they must take the advanced level certificate examination after 6 years of secondary education administered by Zimbabwe Schools Examination Council. Tertiary education This sector of education is run by the Ministry of Higher and Tertiary Education and includes universities, technical, polytechnic and teacher training colleges and various vocational training centers. Governance. Recent factors affecting education in Zimbabwe. Funding Zimbabwe's independence prompted an education reform in 1980 to provide free and universal education to all children through the Zimbabwe Education Act. However, tuition fees and education costs have accumulated over time. Many families pay for tuition even if it is a small fee at public government schools. Parents that do not pay for tuition due to education subsidies are still required to pay additional fees including building fees, uniforms and stationery for their children. Education is not completely free in Zimbabwe due to historical government expenditures on providing infrastructure for education and recent years of global economic crisis. Access to education The current education system faces many challenges, including double-session schooling. Shared overcrowded classrooms enable more students to attend school, but also students are given less attention and time to learn. Gender disparities Gender differences are insignificant in primary education, but Zimbabwe faces clear disparities between males and females in secondary education. Females are increasingly more likely to drop out than their male peers due to early marriages, cost of continuing education and gender-based violence in secondary schools. Teachers Thousands of Zimbabwean teachers have gone on strikes and left the profession in recent years over low salaries, poor working conditions, political violence and election results. In the first decade of the 21st century, 45,000 out of 100,000 teachers in the country left the profession due to. Marked by a time period of hyperinflation, teachers were one of the lowest paid professions, receiving the equivalents of $10 for every 3 months of teaching to as low as $1 every month. Thousands of teachers protested, left public education and migrated to other countries in response to the economic crisis. 14. During a year-long strike from 2008 to 2009, teachers demanded higher salaries paid in international currency while nearly 94% of all rural schools were closed and school attendance rates fell from 80% to 20% in a year. Many teachers joined the informal economy, or black sector, during the crisis by participating in cross-border trading with Botswana and South Africa because civil servants were not required to have visas at the time. Teachers would use their off time during the school year to hoard goods from other country and resell them in Zimbabwe to make a profit and earn a livable living that their teacher salaries did not satisfy. The dollarization of the national economy by the established Government of National Unity in 2009 curbed the effects of hyperinflation and the informal economy. The GNU also allocated every civil servant, including teachers, the equivalents of $100. Teachers were encouraged to re-enter the profession and move back to Zimbabwe, but thousands never returned and got better paying positions elsewhere. 14. The dollarization of Zimbabwe's economy also reduced the amount of teacher participating in the informal economy. A-level Top 100 Schools, 2015. O-level Top 100 Schools, February 2014. See also, Ministry of Higher and Tertiary Education, Zimbabwe, National Council for Higher Education, Zimbabwe, List of schools in Zimbabwe. References. External links, Ministry of Higher and Tertiary Education, Education Statistics and Quality of Education in Zimbabwe, Southern and Eastern Africa Consortium for Monitoring Educational Quality.